Hello and welcome to Toadstool Tarot. We are now in January 2020, beginning of a new decade, and Simon of the Hermit's Cave suggested that members of the Hermit's Cave find their cards of the year and investigate that. So I calculated mine, adding my birthday to the year date, and I came up with the Hanged Man, which to me indicates that for the year ahead, I am going to be investigating things from a new perspective. So I decided I'm going to tackle things to, I'll be on a safety line, but I'll be turning things on their heads and looking at them from a different angle and trying things that are outside my usual comfort zone. So the first deck that I got before the holidays was the Carnival at the End of the World Tarot, which I've shown in a walkthrough already. This is going to be a challenging deck for me because they are more like costume character cards as opposed to action cards. But now, launching into the new year, I have a new interest in, all of a sudden it seems, cards of a modern art, abstract art, very vividly colorful art nature. And I'm starting off with the Thoth deck, which I know is controversial amongst many people. Some people love it, some people hate it. And my approach to it is different than most because I don't really know much about Crowley, and some people have a major issue with Aleister Crowley. But one of the things that I admire is the two most famous decks of the 20th century are the Rider-Waite-Smith deck and the Thoth deck. And the artists who created the imagery for both those decks were both women. And the Thoth deck was created by Lady Frida Harris, and it was during the 30s, I think, late 30s, early 40s. It took a handful of years to create. And tragically, in a way, in a romantically tragic sort of way, neither Crowley nor Lady Frida Harris saw their deck ultimately realized. It wasn't printed until after both of them had passed away. So that's kind of interesting. Now, I've always had issues with this deck because it's more or less a PIP deck, and I've had trouble reading PIP images. But I am an intuitive reader. I'm trying to open myself up to new ways to interpret light and color and shapes and geometry, and I'm also very fascinated with modern abstract art and art from the decades of, surrealism to Dada to abstract art. And a lot of the images in this deck remind me of, they're sort of based, they seem based on art movements like Fauvism and Futurism. There's a lot of bright color and a lot of movement in them. And the Guggenheim did a retrospective last year by a female Swedish artist named Hilma af Klint. And I didn't go, but there's a wonderful walkthrough of the exhibition, painting by painting, on YouTube, and I encourage you to check that out. She was, some say, the first abstract artist, I guess that's arguable, but she was very early on, and her work was highly influenced by the Theosophists and the Anthroposophists, like Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, and their study into spiritualism around the turn of the century. All these things fascinated me and have to do with light, energy, and geometry, and science, and art, and visualization of the soul, and transition, and all these, ethereal notions and ideas and concepts. And I love how these artists interpreted these concepts in their paintings. And so I find that Lady Frida Harris is kind of akin to that sensibility. Now, I ordered this particular version of the Thoth deck. It's the green box, it's the larger cards, because my plan was to discard the book, trim off the borders, and just hold on to the cards, the images, without labels or any assignations, and see, what comes to my intuitively interpreting the images and the colors and shapes. And I've never modified a deck before. I've always been down on that. And had there been an already borderless edition, or even one with black border, maybe I might not have minded. I didn't care for these decorative large borders. Now, just to show you what happened, as I said, this was my first deck modification. And I have in the past used a straight edge and blade to cut pages and cards and things for other projects I've done. And that's worked out well for me. However, I don't have a proper deck surface at home, desk surface, I should say. So a straight edge and a blade, I did a test run on a test card, and it slipped. I thought, this is not going to work for me. I also don't own a guillotine, and I have had trouble in the past with guillotine cutters, paper cutters, slipping or cutting the edge in a wrong way. In the end, I decided if I'm going to have to do this on a tray on my lap, I'm just going to use scissors and be as careful as I can. Now, the cards are not perfect, but they're imperfectly perfect for me. I did get a little corner cutter, and I used that. So this is my first deck mod, and it's not bad, actually. I think I'm happy with it. I mean, the edges aren't entirely even or smooth, but they're close enough, I think. It feels right. This is a sample of the original card back and size. I also don't like these card backs. I'm not fond of that, what I see as a Christian cross symbol, and I don't like the white borders. So I tried first a test trimming off the white border, and you can see already what I think of as an improvement. And I would advise, if you do deck mods, mass-produced decks usually come with an advertising card, and that's usually a good card. Save up those cards. Don't throw them away. They're good cards to use as test cards for cutting and trimming decks. So anyway, I cut off the borders of these, and I wasn't sure how the backs would be affected, but actually it didn't crop the cross, and I think they came out pretty nice. So I'm going to just show you these art images and not say too much about them. I haven't shuffled them yet, but I like these cards so much better without the borders and just the images. Now, this is the major arcana, and I did glance at they had labels and keywords, and they are also described in the booklet, which I glanced at. I did read in the Little White Book, there's an essay by Lady Frida Harris, which accompanied an art gallery show of her paintings for this deck. And I did read that because I'm always interested to see what the artist has to say about their own work. So that was kind of interesting. It didn't go too much into symbolic detail, and a lot of these symbols are related to the Order of the Golden Dawn and study of the Kabbalah. But, you know, I might get into that later. For now, I'm just going to get acquainted with these images and see how I feel about them. And I noticed in going through the major arcana that it was fairly easy for me, even without the labels, to identify which cards these correspond to. For instance, that's the Wheel of Fortune. I think it might be under a different name in this deck, but I'm kind of looking at them, reading them from the associations of the RWS system, which some people, Thoth fans, will probably frown on me for doing that. But hey, you know, everybody has their own methods. They say there is no right way, no wrong way. Whatever works for you. That's the Death card, obviously. I actually did this after seeing, I believe, well, Tarot Oracle did a trimmed version of the deck and did a video, and I was really impressed with the way it looked. I was much more drawn to it than I had been before with the borders. And then after the new year, both Becca of Intuitive Tarot and June of June's Tarot Journey had done videos on this deck, coincidentally at the same time that I ordered a copy, knowing that I was going to trim it. They haven't trimmed theirs. Becca hasn't taken to hers. June seems to enjoy hers and love the borders. I just find from an abstract art point of view, these are some very beautiful images. I like the vivid colors. Actually, they look a little bit like they might be a little bit washed out in this video. They are, some of them, very, very bright. And there's a lot of color variety and pattern in this deck. Very decorative. Some of the more floral ones also remind me of the art of Georgia O'Keeffe. And some like this remind me of the wallpaper patterns of William Morris. So there are a lot of art references in here. Some related to minimal and abstract expressionists. Abstract artist. I also dragged out a book that I love, that I've been referring to. This was an art show at the LA Art Museum back in the 80s, and this wonderful book came out called The Spiritual in Art, abstract painting, 1890 to 1985, and they don't have Lady Frida Harris's paintings in here. They do have some by Hilma of Klint and many other artists that relate to this notion of spirituality being represented in painting and art. And I don't know if the book's still in print, but if you can find a copy, I recommend it. It's fascinating, particularly if you study art or are interested in modern abstract painting. Some of these I really like the almost alchemical or mechanical drawing aspect of some of the card images. They're angles and curves from geometry and I want to say herbology, plant life, biology, I guess. So this is almost an incorporation of the elements. I mean, you have sort of mystical elements, you have geometry of, crystals and curvilinear shapes of, plants and leaves and vines and, living organisms. I love this card, the Swords card. And this one, beautiful colors and image. And you can probably see, if you are familiar with the regular deck, how very different these come across when there are just images with no borders, no labels, no designations. Now, I haven't shuffled the deck yet. This is in order. I do want to make my way through it a few times to make certain that I can readily identify the cards before I start shuffling them. The court cards are a little bit more complicated to designate than the PIP cards, because, for instance, this is the Two of Pentacles. You just sort of count up the image. I love this card too, this 3. And this one. It's just, beautiful modern art. Maybe you don't even want to read with this deck. Maybe you just want to keep as a deck of pretty modern art paintings. I like that one too. So, since I read intuitively, and I usually pick up on expressions and direction and symbols and, actions, this one seems very Georgia O'Keeffe to me. I don't know if I'm going to have trouble with this deck because, obviously you don't have, other than in the courts and the majors, you don't have characters to read from. But then again, there was a little movement back in September when everybody from my group started embracing Marseille decks, and in those you have the PIP cards, and you don't have even as much going on in those PIP cards as you do in these PIP cards. So we'll see. We'll see what I come up with. And of course, I always have the Little White Book, and there are other books online that I can purchase, and there's always Google. I got into tarot again when Google sort of came of age, because you can get answers to just about any question on Google. So if I ever have an issue, I want to know about a color, a symbol, a system, a card, I can go on Google and do a query and find my answer. So all in all, my first deck mod experience was fairly positive. I had some little troubles along the way. Some of the edges are less than straight, but there's enough going on in the images of this deck that stuff like that, little imperfections, don't really stand out. And in handling and well, I haven't shuffled the deck yet. I do hand-over-hand shuffling, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. They feel nice. I'm happy with the way they look and feel. And the nice thing about, I don't really like oversized cards either, so the nice thing about trimming them down is they are now more or less the size of a regular tarot deck, which I like very much. This should be, you know, very easy for me to shuffle and handle now. So that's what I've done with my copy of the Thoth deck, and they have these, I believe, in several different sizes. There's one in a larger box that I think it's a purple box that people have bought, and Becca bought that one thinking it was larger cards, and it's misleading because there's an internal inset with a smaller deck than the green box. So if you want the larger cards, you want the green box. And if I were to trim the smaller cards, they would maybe be like a pocket size. I don't know. But these are just right. So anyway, thanks for indulging me in my beginning of my 2020 adventures into new and unknown areas for me of color and abstraction and going outside my comfort zone. So, talk to you soon. Bye.